Hello, nice to meet you. Last time I provided an overview of the government support system for people with developmental disabilities in Canada, focusing on the government of British Columbia. Starting today, I will explain each step in detail, one by one. As the first step, you need to get a diagnosis. I will introduce how to get a diagnosis in order to receive government support. I will mainly explain based on the information available on the Here and Now website. Although I will display the website on the screen, the text size might be too small to see clearly. The reason I'm showing this is to help you easily find it once you visit the site. So if you have internet access, it would be great if you could turn on your computer and follow along. First of all, our website address is hereandnowca.org. When you type that in, you will see a screen like the one above. Here, I will now choose Korean. Then when you enter here, you will see the menu at the top, which includes an introduction to the organization and more. Among these, I will select the menu labeled Information Provision. When you enter the Information Provision menu, you will see that we have divided it into categories such as symptoms, diagnosis, child support, and school education. Each category is answered in a Q&A format. The first question is, what is the autism spectrum? It appears like this. I have explained this in detail in the previous video. What are the signs that might indicate autism spectrum disorder? I briefly introduced this as well, but nowadays, whether on YouTube or Google, there is a lot of information about what autism spectrum disorder is. So I think it won't be too difficult to find this information. And regarding the question of whether or not to get a diagnosis, we have explained this in detail from episode 2 to episode 4 of our BoTV videos. Many hesitate to get a diagnosis, but we have mentioned that it would be good to decide based on whether you need help or not. There are also cases where people get confused. Even if a child seems to have no issues with communication and appears to have no problems, there are times when they seem different from other children. In such cases, even if communication is good, I think the most important thing to focus on is social skills. So it would be good to assess whether the child plays well with friends, making friends, and is able to make friends. Then, in the next category, there is a category called diagnosis, where there is a suspicion that the child might have autism. There is a Q&A like this, and as you can see here, if there is even a slight suspicion, it is best to consult a doctor. This is what we recommend. Now, if there is any suspicion and you want to get a diagnosis, I will introduce how to receive a diagnosis. Now, there are two ways to get a diagnosis. One is to receive it publicly. The other is to pay out of pocket and receive it privately. Publicly, of course, it doesn't cost money. It's free. To explain the steps, you first need to meet with a family doctor or a physician. The reason is that in British Columbia, you need a referral from a family doctor to see a specialist. So when you meet with a family doctor, they will determine if there are any signs. Then they will refer you to a group of doctors, which is called the BACAN, or in English, the BC, Autism Assessment Network. Then the family doctor will arrange for you to see one of these doctors, and you will go for a diagnosis. If you need a Korean interpreter, you can request one, and this service is provided free of charge. At BCAAN, diagnostic evaluations are provided to children up to the age of 19, and regardless of age, in some cases, even infants as young as 3 years old can receive a diagnosis. Once the evaluation is complete, a specialist at BCAAN will receive an evaluation report called the Clinical Outcomes Form. This document will indicate whether your child has an autism spectrum disorder. As I mentioned earlier, the problem is that the wait time for this public service is too long. It's good because it's free though. Therefore, it can take as short as a year and a half, or as long as over 2 years. So, as I will discuss next time, if you want to receive autism funding, it is set at $12,000 for those under 6 years old and $6,000 for those over 6. However, waiting for 1 or 2 years often means that children surpass the age of 6, which is quite common. Therefore, reducing the waiting list is also a major issue for the government, but it seems that it is not easily reduced. So I will talk more about this when discussing how to apply for autism funding. Since it takes too long to receive public services, we sometimes recommend seeking private services. Now, I will explain how to receive a private evaluation and diagnosis. First of all, who should you get a diagnosis from? We're talking about the qualified individuals, which would be a pediatrician, psychiatrist, or registered psychologist. The part that everyone struggles with is how to find these professionals, and the waiting time here isn't short either. I'm not sure why everyone is so busy. So private is faster than public, and you can find it within a month or two. But here too, there are times when you have to wait up to 6 months. Anyway, it's certain that private services are faster than public ones. But the issue with private services is the cost. About 15 years ago, it cost around $2,000, but now it seems to be almost $3,000. When you receive services privately, the process is similar. First of all, finding a specialist is the most important thing. Once you find a specialist, they conduct interviews over 2 to 3 sessions, including interviews with the child and the parents, and then provide a report. This report should be almost identical to the one provided publicly. I'm trying to display the content on the screen now, and as you can see, at the top it says non-BCA and private diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The report is provided in this format, where part 1 is filled out by the parents and part 2 is completed by the specialist to determine whether autism is present or not. As I mentioned earlier, public services are free but require a long wait, whereas private services are faster but cost money, which is the issue. In the past, this wasn't available, but now an organization called the Children's Charity of BC, known as Variety, provides funding for private assessments, meaning private diagnoses. This is not government funding. Rather, it can be considered a private non-profit organization. They raised funds here, and that's how the funding was established. It started in June 2021, and initially they provided diagnoses for everyone under 18. However, when I looked into it recently, I noticed that there have been some changes in the past few months. So the autism assessment is available for children up to 3 years old. Up to 19, they offer a psychoeducational assessment. I'm not sure if this includes an autism diagnosis, but whether this assessment report can determine the presence or absence of autism is something I need to verify further. But in any case, they provide support for both the autism assessment and the psychoeducational assessment. According to the website, they offer support up to $3,000 for the autism assessment and up to $4,000 for the psychoeducational assessment. However, to receive this support, the family income must be less than $85,000 per year. Naturally, you must be a primary resident to be eligible for this support. So I have pulled up the website of an organization called Variety. If you go there, detailed information is available. And to receive this autism assessment, which didn't exist before, it has now been established. There is a list of clinics and doctors supported by Variety. So there is a comprehensive list of institutions and doctors where you can get an autism assessment for children under 4. So you need to receive it from these people to get support from Variety. That's how you should understand it. Since it takes quite a while to get diagnosed, and during the waiting process, there are cases where people ask what they should do in the meantime. That question is here where it says, I'm trying to meet a doctor and schedule a test with a specialist, but the wait is too long. Is there anything I can get to help my child while waiting? So if you look here, before getting diagnosed and receiving funding, there are local offices. By calling or contacting these local offices, you can enter various programs and receive services to introduce. A few, there's the Infant Development Program. This is aimed at infants. There's the Child Development Center for young children, and then services like speech-language therapy, occupational therapy, and supported child care, which can be provided through agencies in each area. So you need to contact them. But the problem is that there is also a waiting list here. Therefore, if you're lucky, you might get in after a short wait, but often you have to wait a long time, as the waiting list here always seems to be an issue. And then the next question that often comes up is, if someone is coming from another state or country, how should they get diagnosed, or what should they do if they have a diagnosis from another state or country? Even if you don't receive a new one, you must obtain a diagnosis confirmation from a qualified specialist in BC. I'll show you the form for the diagnosis confirmation here. Here you can see the autism program, confirmation of previous diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. This form needs to be confirmed by a specialist in BC, but sometimes it's possible if received from another province. Then the cost is significantly reduced, even if you receive it privately. However, in our case, and when coming from Korea, it seems more common to be asked to obtain a new one. So you need to check whether the existing evaluation can be used or if a new one is required by consulting with a specialist. The next question often asked is whether only Canadian permanent residents or citizens can apply for autism funding. After receiving this diagnosis, in the next session, I will explain how to apply for autism funding, and there you will see that certain documents need to be submitted. So if you look here, what documents are required when applying for registration in the MCFD's Autism Funding Program? Then, if you look here, there are 4 documents needed. One is a document proving the autism diagnosis, which means you need either the public diagnosis certificate or a private diagnosis certificate, as mentioned earlier. Also, a document proving the child's age is required because to receive autism funding, the child must be under 18 years old, so a birth certificate is needed. Then there's the BC Services card to prove residency in BC. Then there's the Autism Program application form, and if you look here, it doesn't say you have to be a permanent resident or a citizen. And from what I've seen around, people who are legally allowed to reside here, including those who have come on a visiting visa or a work visa, right? Those people can also apply for autism funding. So if you prepare and submit the documents here, you can receive autism funding as far as I know. The main content I've explained here is primarily found on our website. It is based on the following materials. I've provided the related site below. Among these, there is something called the Parent Handbook in English, and I have translated it as the Parent Handbook Autism Program Guide in Korean. So, if you click on the site link and go in, you will find the Parent Handbook Autism Program Guide there. If you go through this content, it thoroughly explains in great detail how to receive evaluations and diagnoses and how funding is provided. So what I'm explaining today is a brief summary, and for more detailed information, you can visit this link. If it's difficult to judge based on the signs, I've also posted a useful site here. So if you go to the useful site, I've linked to a site called MCHC and also to one called Pause Sign Inc. So if needed, you can visit these sites and make a judgment. Once the diagnosis is complete, you will receive the results, right? After receiving the results, you will have the first step to apply for various government supports. So next time I will explain how to apply for autism funding. Thank you for watching until now. I will see you next time. Thank you.